Now, for 150 years, the sea forts of the Solent have been familiar to sailors returning home. These unique landmarks are now getting a much-needed makeover, which will hopefully secure their survival. Tim Cooper has been on a voyage of discovery to Spitbank Fort.
A place like Gosport is littered with evidence of its military past, from 17th century bastions to 19th century forts to the much more recent. But for every relic that remains, so much has been lost. So often when the military move out of a place like this, it's left to go to rack and ruin, or indeed flattened for housing, and the heritage of what went on here is lost. But I'm going to three hugely important military landmarks not too far away from here that are being put to a new use, while at the same time retaining their important military past. To get there requires a boat ride out through Portsmouth Harbour and into the Solent. I'm heading for Spitbank Fort, one of 4 sea forts between the mainland and the Isle of Wight. The forts in the Solent were built by British Prime Minister Lord Palmerston in the 1860s. He and much of the country were really frightened of a French attack, so he built a chain of fortified defensive positions all around Portsmouth, including out at sea. Unfortunately for Lord Palmerston, the forts turned out to be a huge white elephant. Work began in 1861 with sandbanks chosen to site the forts and foundations being laid. But construction was soon halted for a review into the best way to defend the approaches to the Solent. In 1867, work resumed and it was all complete by 1878. However, by then the threat from France had evaporated, and even the guns placed within them were obsolete. Collectively, the sea forts and the many more on land have become known as Palmerston's Follies, eventually disposed of by the MOD in 1982. From then to now, several attempts have been made to use these unique structures, most unsuccessful, and inevitably they've begun to deteriorate. But now, Spitbank Fort at least has been given a makeover.
This is one of the Churchill room, which is one of our 8 rooms here at Spitbank Fort. Each of the bedrooms here are where the original cannon would have been facing out of, so they've got some lovely light in them. The actual rooms themselves we tried to keep as original as possible, keeping some of the original features such as the vaulted ceilings and the ironwork around us.
Spitbank's been transformed into a luxury retreat. 16 people can now stay here in splendid isolation, but it won't be cheap, and some might feel its heritage is being somehow diluted. But the owners stress they've gone out of their way to retain the military past of this structure.
People weren't able to visit it, and now they can. Hopefully makes it a worthwhile venture, because we're looking to use horse stands, which is derelict, and we do want to turn that into a historic monument and a museum, so people can see what the forts were like.
The lower levels look very much as they would have done during the 19th and early 20th century, albeit with modern touches. Like all buildings of a certain age, Spitbank Fort has its very own ghost story, and down here, in the narrow gap between the Solent and the fort itself, is where I'm told you can sense the ghostly apparition. The smell of players' navy-cut tobacco, a hand on your shoulder, the hand, most likely, of one Sergeant Attrell, who sadly lost his life here in 1910. And some areas have been entirely preserved as they would have been. The owners of this fort have bought horse sands and no man's land forts. One will become another hotel, the other a museum. The future, for now at least, looks secure for these fascinating parts of our military history. Tim Cooper, Forces News, Spitbank Fort.